Hey guys, welcome back to Building a Family Business here on Builder Funnel Radio. This is episode 6, and we kind of kick off this episode shooting the shit a little bit about habits and books we're reading. Go on a couple of tangents, so if you're not interested in that, go ahead and fast forward a little bit. But really the topic for this week's episode is all about relationships in the work environment versus those same relationships outside the work environment. So in family business, we work together all day, and then you go home, you get together for holidays and other fun activities. And so we dive into those dynamics, how you navigate those situations, how you keep a positive attitude, and kind of either separate those things or don't separate those things. So hope you enjoy this episode. Again, this is episode 6 of Building a Family Business here on Builder Funnel Radio. Hey guys, welcome back to Building a Family Business here on Builder Funnel Radio. This is episode 6. I'm with Wes and Brooks, and I don't know, this episode will be a fun one. We've all got the laughs, I guess. But anyways, welcome guys.
Thanks, Spence.
Thank you, Spence. Appreciate it.
Yeah. So what are you guys reading these days?
Well, I've been still reading Factfulness, and I'm finding that really enjoyable. In the very front, they have 13 questions they ask you, so they're trying to test you if you have your great facts, or do you understand what the facts are. So I was excited. I got 10 correct out of the 13 questions. So
oh, nice. That's probably like a B+ or something. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm okay with B+.
Yeah, well, and question 1 was, "What's your name?" So yeah,
I missed that one, but
yeah,
I got some of the others.
That's one
opportunity for improvement. Yeah. Yeah, Wes, how about you?
Right now, I just finished reading Atomic Habits by James Clear. I really enjoyed it. I've read other habit books and stuff, but it is really a good one, and so highly recommend.
Any habits you're gonna break? Any bad habits?
I got lots of bad habits, but those are what keep me warm at night, wrap my bad habits around me.
Keep you safe.
Yeah, exactly right.
They feel good,
One of them was
yeah.
coffee drinking, so I love coffee, so that's good.
What?
I know.
Wow.
I switched to beer.
Oh my gosh.
No,
Wow,
I switched
sad.
from beer to tea. Right now I'm having a delicious caramel apple delight tea, herbal tea by whoever makes all that tea.
All that tea.
Yeah,
Up in Boulder.
The one tea company that
The
makes
one,
all
yeah.
the tea.
Essential seasonings.
Yeah, Celestial Seasonings up in
Celestial
Boulder.
seasonings. There you go.
And another sidebar would just be, that's a great tour. If you ever go to Boulder, take the Celestial Seasonings tour of their factory. It's pretty cool.
There you go.
There you go.
Well, we, I guess whenever this releases, we're in the midst of, stay-at-home orders. So whenever we can make it out to Boulder, we will get out.
Well, that's great. I was just assuming that the tour would happen in happier times.
Ah, yes.
Yes.
We actually just finished up reading Atomic Habits as a team here at Builder Funnel as well.
Oh, did you really? Oh, good.
Yeah. So, yeah.
Did any
Surprisingly, we hadn't talked about that, but
Did any action items come out of it for people, or did you guys take it that next step, or no?
yeah, a lot of people are kind of working on just individual things. So as we work through the book, people will share, I'm trying to layer in this habit, or I'm trying to, get rid of this habit. And it's cool to see, because he has some good strategies in there and tactics around either adding or removing habits.
Right.
And it's interesting. Just things as simple as changing your environment and how powerful that can be. And
Right. Sure. Making something more difficult, just making it difficult to execute your bad habit, whatever that is.
Like taking the batteries out of your TV remote and putting them across the room. You plop down and then you're like, oh. And even just that simple, like, I don't want to get up, then you might like grab a book or do something different, then.
Or like putting your Hershey chocolate bars inside a time locked safe that you can only access between 11 and 12 at night.
You can go to that extreme.
Yeah.
Not that we're talking about anything specific, but
Yeah, that's a good specific strategy to use.
If you happen to be a Hershey chocolate bar fanatic. Yeah.
Yeah, I have found though, just the simple act of removing those things from the house. I haven't had to put it in a safe yet, so.
Yeah, no, you're right. I mean, it's as simple as not bringing it into the house most of the time. Just, oh, okay, fine.
Yeah, and I find Not for you, no.
Well, that's why the stay-at-home order is tough for Brooks, because he can't run out and pick up whatever it was that was missing in the house.
Exactly right. If it's missing in the house, I know where to go get it. Yeah, and I will. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, today we were gonna talk about habits. Really, no, we're actually gonna shift gears and talk about something else. Although that may be a good session for a later date. But really, in thinking about the balancing the relationship that you have with a family member at work and also at home, you know, because when you're in family business, there's a lot of blending, there's a lot of overlap. There's times when you're together working on, you know, you're in one environment or another. And so, yeah, I kind of wanted to dig into that. And I know kind of the early days of the business, you know, you guys were working together, and also your brother Todd. But Wes, what did that look like as you guys were all, you know, in the business, you know, all day long, but then you're probably also hang out after when you're doing other stuff or going water skiing and that sort of thing. So
Sure.
yeah, what did that look like for you guys?
Well, I think it's interesting when I saw that you wanted to talk about this particular topic, and I was thinking about, you know, some of those early days, and I would have to say, and Brooks may differ wildly on this point, most likely he will, but I thought that we got along really, really well. And I think mostly it's just because we stayed out of each other's lane, and it may have just been the way that we developed. So when I started building, I was in charge of everything, right? So land acquisition, financing, setting the specs for the house, you know, bidding it out, on-site supervision, marketing, warranty, all of those things. So soup to nuts. So when Brooks came along, and 5 years later, 4 or 5 years later, and entered into the business, you know, I immediately turned to Brooks and said, here, you know, and I gave him the thing I really hated the most, which was basically on-site supervision. And it was also the biggest chunk of time, you know, a huge chunk of time. So Brooks jumped in and he took that over, that piece, and I stuck with those other things. And I think, Brooks, were you doing specs as well? Or is it just, no, I think I was doing specs. You're doing on-site supervision, warranty. Were you doing
I was doing on-site. As a superintendent, I was running the jobs.
Yeah, right.
So you would hand me a specification package for that house and say, hey, here's the plan, here's the permit, you know,
there you
go
go.
to town. Here's a customer we sold it to. We don't really know what they're buying, but go ahead and make sure you get that all done right. And
yeah, exactly.
So good luck with it.
A little famous for that, yeah. So anyway, but then 2 years later, Todd came along, and then Todd took over for Brooks, and he did all the on-site supervision and warranty work. And that was, you know, part of the way this stuff works is, can everyone find a place where they're really well suited? And so Todd came into that role, and he was really well suited for on-site supervision, you know, just really good at that. In fact, that's the lane that he stayed in, really, between warranty and estimating and on-site supervision for the rest of his career, really.
Yeah, absolutely.
And very, very good at it. So then I simply handed off more of my stuff to Brooks. So Brooks took over marketing. What else did you take over, Brooks?
It was mostly sales and marketing. You still handle land acquisition.
Right.
And but as the company grew, that took up more. You had land acquisition, permitting, and really making sure the deal's closed. So even though I worked on the sales and marketing side, you know, you were heavily involved in, hey, making sure these get closed for cash flow, and you ran the rest. You ran the business operations, so you handled all the accounting people and, you know, cash flow and financing.
Right. Still handle the financing piece. But that seemed to work pretty well. And as Brooks mentioned, you know, as the size of your business grows, there's more to do in each category. But generally, we didn't really get into anybody else's category. No one wanted to do that. Didn't feel comfortable doing it. And so it worked pretty well, I thought.
It did.
Yeah. And then when I exited, Brooks simply stepped into the roles of all the things that I was doing. And, you know, he really had to do all of the stuff that he was doing, plus the things that I was doing. So, you know, super big role there.
One of the things that is Todd and I experienced this in the latter half of our career, which was we, as partners, so we're brothers and we're partners. I'm the older brother, he's the younger brother. He handled all things related to production, everything we produce, and I handled everything else. And the workloads were similar. A lot of times production was a heavier load than the work I was doing. But neither of us had any interest in the other person's space. And that makes a big difference, because if someone really wants to be over in the other person's space, I think that's where the conflict comes. So as in a family business, if you have siblings working together or cousins working together, I mean, you see where, two brothers are partners and then they have their children come into the business. So now cousins are interacting, and there could be, they could be similar in age, they could be similar in expertise, or they could have a spread. They could be 10 years apart. And if there's not clearly defined roles, then you can get people bumping into each other, which then can create conflict. It creates conflict amongst the people working together, and then creates conflict amongst, if their parents are still partners, that, you can have, we had a local asphalt business that broke up, not because the brothers didn't get along, but because their two sons working in the business did not get along. And then the brothers did not get along. Because, they had to go, it flowed up.
Yeah.
And it ended up falling along lines of, I'm going to back up my son. And so then the two brothers who had got along famously for 30 years, it came apart over that. So I think it's going back to defining the roles early on so that people know where they're supposed to be. And then lots of communication. It goes back to, we talked about it before, communication, like, why is this not working?
And I think that's a good point, Brooks, because if you think about before we actually started building officially together full time, we had already spent a number of summers working together along with our sisters, building a few houses each summer. So we already knew how to work together, and we kind of knew how we fit together. And so I think that was pretty invaluable. I don't think we thought about it at the time, but it certainly was helpful. But if you throw a couple of people together who have never worked together, have no idea what someone else's work habits, work ethic, how they view the world. So, and I think that's an important thing. How do you view the world? If you all view the world the same, now your worldview may be incorrect, but if you all view it the same, then you're going to get along and you're going to push along pretty well towards your goals. But if you don't, then you're setting yourself up for some serious problems if you can't negotiate your way through that.
Yeah, and I think one thing that you guys were talking about there was just defining the roles. But Brooks, I feel like there's also got to be a certain level of trust, there too, because you said like you didn't want to be doing what Todd was doing. He didn't want to be doing what you were doing. So even if you don't want to be playing in his space, there still has to be, I would imagine, a level of trust that it's getting executed in a way that it should. Versus, just saying, oh, we're both going to play in these two different areas, and then just going, well, we'll see how it shakes out.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that was one of the strong points, I think, of having a family business, is that ability to but having ultimate trust in who you're working with. I mean, I would trust Todd, and or Wes, with all my money. Because I know they would watch out for me, and I come out with more money at the end of the day than I wouldn't. So that's the kind of trust that I have in Todd. It's like, hey, I may not agree with everything he's doing out in the field. I might do it differently, but the flip side is he doesn't agree with everything I'm doing, on the financing side or other things. So, but we trusted, hey, the other person's got my best interest at heart. And so that can work whether you're related or whether you're not related.
For sure.
I think it can be a stronger bond, in a family relationship, between, I think, easier probably between siblings, or maybe between a parent-child, depending on that relationship. Maybe harder on a cousin level, maybe because they're not raised in the same household. But I gotta believe hopefully you could trust your sibling or your parent or your cousin as much or more than anybody else.
Yeah, I think it probably in the best situation of family business, everyone understands what everyone else's weaknesses are, and they're okay with it. So I might be weak in a particular aspect. Well, the guys, Brooks and Todd had to deal with a number of things that I was notoriously weak in, so I had a tendency to want to drive by lots and just observe them from the street and then buy them. So they would, dub those as a drive-by lot. And we had a few of those that did not work out well. We had some other ones that worked out famously, but they didn't kill me over it. They knew I was busy and trying to get enough lots in the system, and they were okay with it. And likewise, there's areas that probably, they weren't superb at either in certain aspects. And you roll with it and you go, yeah, okay, but look at all this other stuff that's great. And we're just going to backstop that person in that particular area, or we'll make that work.
Because it's more important in that situation, it's a family member. So it's more important to try to figure out that situation so it's a benefit for the family and the family business versus, well, this person we hired is not the right person for the job. So, we need to make a change. If they're not related, then that's a change you can make and you're not going to see them at Christmas.
I will say, though, that probably only works if the family members, their weaknesses are only like 10% out of their total performance. If it's a flip of that, then it's a train wreck. And then you're trying to figure out how to separate that person from the business and still keep your family relationship.
Yeah, I think wanted to make that point, which is the things I disagreed with Todd in the field were not such that we would not make money and we'd go out of business, and vice versa. What he disagreed with me were not things that would put us out of business. So you have to go back to the beginning. If you're in a situation where you already have family members in the business, which is pretty typical. I mean, it just evolves that way. So, a lot of our listeners might be, well, I've already got my brother in the business or my sister, or I've got multiple family members in the business. Again, I think it's sitting down and starting to talk through, hey, are you even happy doing this right now? Is it, and which, can be challenging because you're opening up a lot of stuff for discussion, which maybe has kind of been there for years and, well, we really don't want to talk about it. And sometimes, it's not worth it. You just kind of, figure out how to work your way through it. And, at the end of the day, people move on of their own volition. So
yeah,
sometimes the communication, depending on where you are in the dynamic, can be more damaging.
Yeah. And I'm kind of curious too, just because you mentioned, Christmas, but like when the three of you were all working together and maybe, you had a drive-by lot situation where, the other two guys are like, did any, and I'm just using that as an example, but was there any times where something not so great happened or you guys encountered a challenge on the business side, but then when you were doing something outside of work, it started to creep in, or did you guys just draw a line? Or I'm curious how that all kind of evolved or played out.
And I don't feel like that really ever happened.
No, I don't think so.
I think when times were tough, and I was thinking about that a little while ago, there are definitely times in our working career together where times were tough. We had a good run and then the market would fall out. In fact, we had a notable one where it was like one summer sales were going great, and somewhere in the middle of July, bang, everything just dried up, no sales. And for quite some period of time, we had a lot of inventory sitting around. So those times are a little tougher because you're trying to manage cash flow and everything. But I think generally the goal was, hey, everyone's going to hop in and we're going to figure out something. So, we did some things that maybe weren't so great, like cut salaries. And we also did things like, well, let's get together on the weekend and let's go build decks on our own houses so we don't have to pay a subcontractor to do that. We can all make some more money to augment our income. So we're looking for more collaborative solutions maybe to our business problems. But I don't know. Brooks, did you ever feel like
it's interesting in thinking about that question, which is when you work together all day, you have to work really hard to, are we going to play together? are we going to, do some fun things? Because, I would say for Todd and I, at the end of our career, we were, worked together for 32 years, partners for 17. By the time, the end of our career, we weren't recreating a lot together because we were working together so much and it was so intensive. And we went through a 2008 to 2018, which are just a tough 10 years, the first 6 years being abysmal and the last 4 being, good. But so we actually had to make an effort to get together, and do stuff together outside of work. Otherwise we're just working. And so so you have to make time to do that. But, besides a Christmas holiday or, we started doing things like we would go out to see a play or see a show or do something, go out to dinner and just shoot the breeze. And, it got to the point where when we get together for a meeting, if it's a monthly management meeting or something like that, we start out with, hey, what are the kids up to? What are you guys doing? What do you got on the board for vacation? So trying to lighten that up. But I would say we very heavily went to the, 99% was work and very little was, recreating together. Whereas when we started 30 years earlier, it was, we worked all day, but then you go do fun stuff on the weekend or whatever. But it became less so as time went on and as your family responsibilities grew.
But Brooks, how do you think that has morphed, if at all, since you guys have retired?
Well, well, now we're getting back to just doing stuff, fun stuff together, so doing different activities, going mountain biking or things like getting together, the 2 couples for dinner and doing things like that. We're taking a trip together. So it's coming back to that. But definitely without, I guess the point is without intention,
right?
Stuff doesn't happen. So it's coming back to that, being intentional about everything you do, being in your business, being intentional in your business and being intentional about your relationships.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting insight because I think all of us have a tendency to emphasize the work part of it, especially.
Absolutely.
It's easy to talk about that stuff when you're just hanging out, because it's like, oh, we can, well, one, you're typically excited about it or you're trying to problem solve or you're trying, whatever. And so if you have more quote unquote downtime away from the office, you feel like you're still progressing or, that sort of thing. So I think your point of just saying, hey, commit to putting some other things on the calendar that are non-work related, or like having some parts of meetings that are dedicated to just catch up time, and to your point, to kind of lighten the mood or just change it so it's not 100% work and you can change that balance. I bet a lot of family businesses like that, where it's just like, hey, because you tend to be hardworking and you're just jumping in. You're like, well, we got stuff to do.
Well, I would say it got better when our spouses came into the business during the recession, where we were just shorthanded, so it was all hands on deck. And both Julie, Todd's wife, and Heather, my wife, were, by nature pretty social, and so we get together for a steering meeting, and we even do it to this day. We have our monthly steering meeting. First 30 minutes of that meeting, we're just catching up. Todd and I are sitting there tapping our fingers on the desk, like, hey, when are we going to start this meeting? So we've had to retrain ourselves to like, hey, we're going to catch up, socialize, connect at that level, and then we'll get on to the work stuff. And that then creates that basis for a better relationship, because you're connecting on multiple levels.
Yeah, that makes sense. And this, like, we've been talking a lot about the sibling relationship. You guys are all brothers, and I think when I think about my relationship with my siblings, and especially my brother and some of the activities we did together, I think there is, not always, but oftentimes you have a closer connection for whatever reason, and you you can communicate really effectively because you grew up together. You, like you guys said earlier, you know a lot of these things about the other person, how they react to situations, how they communicate, what kind of pushes their buttons. So if you're working in business, you're like, I'm not going to push those buttons because we're working on the same team here.
Or I am going to push their buttons.
Yeah, or you are, yeah. But you can make that decision, right? You know.
Hey, Mom, watch this.
Put this guy in orbit, you know.
Yeah. But I think it changes a little bit when you don't have that level of familiarity, you know. And so Wes, I know when you came out to buy the business from Jerry, I'm curious, did you, like, what differences did you see in that kind of communication, both like in the work environment, but then outside the work environment versus what you had with Brooks and Todd?
Sure. Yeah, good question. And so for our listeners, Jerry is my father-in-law. And so I bought his, my in-laws direct mail business. So had no experience at all with direct mail. You know, all my background is in building. I've done it for a lot of years. And so really knew nothing about this, and moved halfway across the country to do it. So Jerry's style was very different than family style that I was used to. And so that did take some adjustment for me. So he was very, a man of few words. And so he really said, you know, I came in, I handed him a check, and he goes, great, thank you very much. And so why don't you go figure out something to do? You know, and so, and it was his way of saying, hey, I'm gonna let you have free reign to figure out this business, figure out how it runs, what needs to happen. And so he was very gracious that way. And I really hopped in and observed for a period of time. And then I was able to go ahead and start working on different projects to improve the business. So I will say that because he was very reticent to give me a lot of feedback, there's probably more feedback that he could have given me that would have been helpful to me in learning the business and taking it over. But I think he was concerned about stepping on my toes. So it was definitely a different communication style, but we did develop a very strong relationship over the years, and to the point of, you know, family first. You know, now that, you know, he retired, bought the business, he retired, now I've retired, sold the business. And we have a very strong relationship, and I consider that to be an important one out of all my family relationships. So let's get together for breakfast once a week. Let's talk and catch up. We don't talk about anything at all related to the business that we once owned together, and that I owned for a lot of years. And that was his baby. You know, he loved that business. I mean, he just nurtured that business and grew that business. And now it's like, no, you know, that's really not the important thing anymore. And so it never comes up. Don't talk about the industry at all. So it's just kind of interesting as I think back over that progression of that relationship. So, and I would still say, you know, the family is the important relationship over the business relationship in most cases, unless it's a toxic relationship and it takes your business down and harms a lot of people. That certainly wasn't the case here, so wouldn't apply. But
yeah, that makes sense. And so it sounds like, yeah, there's definitely a shift in style, and it sounds like you kind of just adapted to learning that style in terms of how you communicated, just because it was so different from what
I did. Yeah, I just adapted to his style, really. And I'm a fairly adaptable person that way. That's more just my personality. So I'm going to adapt so I can work with that person. And so that worked pretty well.
Yeah. And then I know, Brooks, you had mentioned, obviously, at one point, you and Todd, both of your wives, came into the business. And then Wes, your wife, my mother, for everybody listening, drawing all the lines and connections. You guys obviously worked together and had to make different decisions. I guess I'm curious, because we could go a lot of directions with this, but like that specific relationship, how do you keep that relationship, you know, healthier, you know, upbeat when things are tough? Because you're navigating all these decisions, you know, that people have different risk profiles, stuff we've talked about in previous episodes. So Brooks, maybe we'll start with you, but like, are there any tangible things that you guys, like, you intentionally did to say, hey, we're going through these tough times, but here's like some ground rules, or here's how we want to communicate? Or was it just you felt your way through it? Or
I think we felt our way through it because it was such a fire drill. You know, we went from Todd and I running the business on our own, really determining all aspects of the business, to, oh, this business is on the rocks, and Julie and Heather coming into the business, Heather on the accounting side and the cash flow side, Julie on the design side. And all of a sudden we now had a business with 4 people in it. And so Todd and I had to adapt to being, you know, I like to be king all day long and be in charge. And so all of a sudden we have now 4 owners that have input. So we adapted by having a weekly steering meeting. So we just got the 4 of us in the room. We had a set agenda, and we said, hey, what should be on this agenda? Well, we know cash flow needs to be on this agenda. We know accounts receivable needs to be on this agenda. You know, so the things that we're going to keep the business alive. And that agenda has changed over the years. And we went from, you know, almost meeting daily because we were in crisis mode in 09 and 10 and 11, to meeting weekly and then meeting monthly. But when we were running the business, we met weekly diligently, and we went through that agenda, and we had miscellaneous items we could add to that. You know, we had employees was another thing on the agenda. You're talking about, you know, how's everybody's employees, that there's reporting to them, you know, any of the things that were critical to the business were on that agenda. So we as owners had to deal with that together. And because in construction, you're taking a lot of risk and you're personally guaranteeing a lot of debt, we began to bring deals to that meeting and say, hey, here's this land deal. What do people think? We go out, take a tour of it, you know, and if someone in the group didn't like it, we didn't do it. So we really operated by consensus. It wasn't like a vote where, well, you know, 3 to 4, sorry, you know, you're out. So we worked our way through it, but we really operated by consensus. And if someone wasn't comfortable with doing something, then we didn't do it. And everybody was willing to do that because probably because of that family connection. Because it's like, hey, it's more important that we get along. You know, we'll make as much money somewhere else. We don't have to do every deal. So, you know, no one, you know, died for their cause or something like that. So that's how we incorporated, you know, new ownership or new inputs, because we had 2 new business owners who had been pretty silent up until now, who are now like, hey, you know, the outcome of this affects my financial well-being. So I'm really interested, and I'm in here, you know, I'm in here swinging.
yeah.
I guess we should use that consensus thing on our drive-by lots.
Well, you know, and that's the thing where it might have been a good idea, but then I don't think, you know, you bring up a good point, which is at the end of the day, that worked for us because we had worked together for so long. But Wes, I would say, really, you know, in a business, someone's got to be in charge.
Absolutely, I would agree with that point.
I think we did have some times where we operated by consensus with you and I and Todd and our dad, and I don't think it worked. I think, you know, somebody's got to be in charge, and, you know, if you've got the title of president or you're running the company, then you call the shots until someone takes you out. And I think it's just the way it is, or I think it's the way it should be. And then you can operate.
Well, ultimately, someone does have to make a decision, and
Yep.
it would be very, very difficult to consistently make excellent decisions with total consensus, because I think.
And I don't think we made excellent decisions all the time. And I'm not disagreeing with someone else's opinion. I mean, I think probably by consensus we were saved from making some bad decisions.
That would be the point. Yeah, you can save yourself from bad decisions, but you wouldn't
also
make great decisions.
We missed probably some great opportunities.
Sure.
But, you know, that's 20/20 hindsight. So I probably a strong believer in it. Someone's got to be in charge. Someone's got to call the shots, and they're getting paid the big bucks to be right or wrong. And if they're wrong, they're gonna get fired, you know, or their business is gonna go out of business.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's interesting that you say that because it made me think. There's been a number of times over the years where I asked for input from the whole team on different things, some small, some big, but like you go into it thinking whatever you're thinking already, like, oh, I'm going to decide X. And then you get all these different viewpoints. And you're like, well, now we're never going to make a decision. So you end up just making the decision anyway.
But you
What
got
you
some
were going to
input,
do.
you know.
Yeah, but you get some
input.
input, which is helpful. And sometimes it might change your decision. But I think that highlights your point of like, somebody's got to call the shot, at the end of the day. And there may be scenarios where you really can operate where it's that consensus format, but it's probably got to be really the right situation in a certain scenario for that to play out, and maybe not a long-term solution.
Well, but I think it goes back to, and we touched on a little bit in previous episodes about equity. Who's got the most at risk?
Sure.
And I believe if whoever's got the most at risk gets to call the shots. And so I think that's where you can get disagreements if you're transitioning ownership from from a parent to an adult child, and you've given all the control to the adult child, yet the parent still has all the risk because you haven't done, there hasn't been a buyout or something like that. You're going to get friction there. So there has to be a good transition of equity, ownership, and control. So whoever's making those final decisions, it's their money on the line. It's not somebody else's.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to look at it. But I do agree with the idea of getting input.
Absolutely.
Because if everyone has their input into that,
yep.
And they know ultimately you are going to make that decision, but at least they've had their say.
Absolutely.
Then that's fair. And I think everyone feels okay about that on the team. And then it's much easier for everyone to coalesce behind whatever the ultimate decision is.
Yeah.
You come back and say, hey, I took everybody's input. I recognize that this isn't going to agree with everybody, but this is why I did it. Ultimately, I have to go and make this call, and I'm going to make it. And everyone go, okay.
Yeah.
I can get behind that. Sure.
Totally agree with that. Yeah. Getting input's great. It's setting the expectation with people you're getting input from, which is, hey, I'm looking for input. I know I've got to make this tough decision. I'd like to hear what you think.
It's not a democracy.
So it's not a democracy. No.
Yeah. So I'm interested, Wes, to hear from you in working with your wife, Karen. How did you guys take a similar approach with business decisions? Because it sounded like with Brooks and Todd, like you guys kind of made all the decisions for a while, hit the recession, then your wives came into the business, and then you kind of operated via consensus for a while, and that worked because it seemed like you probably were operating on the lowest risk, decision. If somebody was like, oh, well, let's not do that, that might have been avoiding some risk, and so you wouldn't. But Wes, how did that play out for you? How did you guys make decisions when there were tough decisions to be made?
Yeah, good question. And we're 50-50, right? So 50-50 owners of the business. My role generally over the years was just, I was running the business. I was in the business. I was in the office every day. And Karen's role was handling HR, oversight of HR and payroll, things like that. So, which was more of a part-time position, but allowed us to keep track of any issues that happened there. So I would say when times were good, we just rolled right along, and I made the decisions. And when times got hard in the Great Recession, I definitely started turning more and more to Karen to get more input. Obviously, whenever you're in a tough situation, you're going, oh, I need somebody to talk to, and let's talk about this. And so, that's what you talk about. I think we never really had any conflict over decisions that were made. I always felt like I would make the decision because, as Brooks said, you whatever your title is, in that case, I was president. So I was going to make those decisions. I think there are times when I could have done a better job probably of listening. And certainly, sometimes I didn't always hear the message that Karen was delivering, especially around HR issues and everything. And so if I had been a better listener, we probably would have avoided, some few issues over the years. None of them catastrophic or anything like that, but just, okay, well, I could have dodged that one if I had been a better listener. And Karen, to her credit, never came back and said, "Oh, I told you so," or anything like that. She's always very gracious about it. She more would say, I should have spoken up a little bit louder.
Yeah, hint, hint. Yeah, next time do
Like,
something
yeah,
different.
okay, I get that. I appreciate that, but it's probably
Sometimes she walks out with a bullhorn. Yes.
attention, all swimmers out of the ocean.
That's right.
So, but we really didn't have any conflicts. And I think also one thing I was going to recommend for people that work in a family business is go ahead and do some sort of, not personality profiling, but behavioral or style profiling. I would recommend DISC. There's also Myers-Briggs. I just happen to be more familiar with the DISC profiling system. And certainly we did that at all of our companies. Brooks has done it at his, do it at our current company that we work at and work together at. So what it does is it helps you understand how people behave in particular situations or what makes them comfortable around decision making, communication. So in this case, if you have some people that have different styles, you can adapt to their style in communicating with them. But in the case for us, Karen is not what is called a high D, where someone who wants to make all the decisions. So Brooks, I don't think I'm speaking out of school here, is a high D and wants to make all the decisions. And like he said, someone has to be king and he wants to be king. So that's cool because he's in the king role. So that's pretty helpful. What's less easy to deal with is if you have that reversed in your company and you have someone who's a high D who wants to be making all the decisions, and then you have someone maybe in the leadership role that's, I don't know, maybe a high C, which would be somebody who likes to really get things exactly right and check all the boxes, may have trouble making a decision. And all of a sudden you could have some conflict unless they understand that about each other and can help bridge the gap between their two styles. So I think everyone should go out and get DISC profiling done.
I think it's probably the first. I think it's one of the first things you should do. If you're just you got your company going and you're like, it's kind of working, we're making money, but I'm trying to get better at it, trying to be a better business owner or business, or even if you're not the owner and you're listening and you're like, who knows, you might be 2 or 3 steps down, or who knows where you are. Just your own understanding of that, of your own personality, is great. And if you're the owner and you can say, hey, we're doing this profile, we're going to work on this for 6 months, the company's just going to work better as you start to use that understanding of personalities and how people interact. So if someone is a high D and they're not in the top dog position, they can say, okay, that's not for me to make those decisions right now. So I need to damp that down a little bit, and I can use that energy in a different direction to do a better job of what I'm doing. But I don't need to be arguing with the person in charge because that's not my role right now.
Right. And I think DISC profiling can be helpful to do with your family members too, even those that are not involved in business. And so if everyone, it's just helpful. I mean, if everyone understands, knowledge is always a good thing, I think. And so the more knowledge you can gain, then, you can get something from that.
Yeah.
But that's about it on that.
Yeah. And there's a few more questions I wanted to get to, but we may have to reserve some of them for a future episode. But I think there's one more thing I want to ask you guys, because as you were talking, I was thinking about it, because you said when things were just running pretty good or normal, like you guys were just calling the shots and kind of just rolling with it. But then it was like during the tough times, and it was like, oh, hold on, like let's get some more input. Let's talk about some things in more detail. I'm curious, would you continue to operate in that fashion, if you rewound in time, or would you get more input when things are good? Or do you feel like that's just kind of the nature of it? It's like, oh, when things get tough, we rally together, we problem solve, we get through it together. Brooks, I don't know, I'm interested to.
We stayed with that program. So we operated, and we own real estate together, both couples now. So we operate with that the same program. So, today we had our monthly steering committee, went through the P&L, went through cash flow, went through any sort of capital issues, talked about, what's going on in the economy right now. and came up with our game plan. And then it's like, again, it was an hour and a half meeting and 30 minutes was catching up. And then but that's how we do it. And I think it works. I mean, for me, I like to be in charge of everything. And so I have to dial that back because I'm not in charge. We're working as a team. So but I think there's enough benefit from having a team that, it's worth doing that.
Yeah.
I think it would be a sad thing if you don't take all the benefit that you can get out of a downturn and carry that forward into the next upturn. So if you went through a downturn, you said, "Oh, I changed everything around. I got all this extra input. I really, everyone helped me get through this, and we made it through." And then times go up and times are good, and you just dump all that.
Yeah, that's a waste.
That's foolishness. So I think it's just part of your natural progression. Hopefully, you're just going to keep going higher and higher and higher in your ability to work with others and to use everyone to the greatest possible extent and benefit.
And it's part of your business systems that you're creating, to create a system, a business that has systems that allow you to be successful. So, our steering committee meeting is part of our system.
Right.
Yeah. No, I think that's well said. So it was more of an evolution, and then that stayed, as a result of going through the challenges.
Yeah, it's definitely a positive evolution. And it's just that, as a business owner, you really don't have to carry the whole load on your back. So you may set up a kitchen cabinet with just some of other business people that you want their input. Maybe that if you're a sole proprietor and there's not really going to be anybody else available to, that would be another solution to do that, to get that support.
Yeah, that's good input. Well, like I said, I had a few more things, but we're getting to the end of our time, so we'll tackle those in a future episode. And just remember too, for everybody listening, as we wrap, we'd love to field questions. If you guys have some family business dynamic type, relationships or questions going on, send them in. Go ahead and use the email address radio@builderfunnel.com. Put all caps family in the subject line, and we can flag those down. But hopefully this was a good one for you guys. Hopefully it gave you some good insight or some tips and strategies that you can use going forward. And don't forget to leave us a review over on iTunes. That helps spread the word. And we'll see you next week here on Builder Funnel Radio. Hey guys, I hope you enjoyed that conversation today on building a family business. Again, we kind of talked all things, family dynamics in and outside the workplace. And as we were going through that conversation today, there were a few things that stood out as takeaways. And I think one is really thinking through how you make decisions in good times or in bad times. We kind of talked about that, where both Wes and Brooks have kind of learned that, like, going through some tough times, you pull in some people, you revamp how you make decisions and what your process looks like. And they both kind of said it would be kind of a waste to throw that away. And so I think that was a really good takeaway for me in thinking about how you go about operating and making those decisions, whether it's good times, bad times, or indifferent. So I thought that was really good. And then two, I know we've mentioned it on previous episodes, but that personality profile, doing that, I think that's step one, but really understanding who you're working with, how they operate, what their risk tendencies look like, how they communicate, how they make decisions. And if you really figure those things out, and then you're both staying in your own lane, or if there's 3 or 4 people in the family, if everyone's working in their specific area, then you've got a really good shot at making sure those dynamics are harmonious and you have good communication and you're not ending up in these really toxic environments. And so I think understanding people's personality profiles is a big one. And then the guys have talked about it a lot, but I think that final one of just over communicating and talking about things, and so that way, when you're in the business, you've got that level of communication, you've got that level of trust. And then when you're, out skiing or you're getting together for holidays, then you've kind of already accounted for that and tackled that in the way you're operating the business. And so it seems like if you do those things, then it's not going to bleed over and negatively impact kind of the personal aspect of it. So those are my takeaways from today. I hope you enjoyed the conversation. Again, don't forget to leave us a review over on iTunes, and definitely send in questions. We want to hear from you. I know there's a ton of family businesses out there in the construction space. So send those over to radio@builderfunnel.com, put family in all caps in the subject line, and we will tackle those. So thanks again for listening, and we will see you next week on Builder Funnel Radio.